On today's show, we're talking Milwaukee Bucks and Houston Rockets. And I'm going to start by asking about TyTy Washington. What can he bring to the Bucks? Because this is a position of need. And on a team that doesn't have too much young talent, a former first-round draft pick sounds pretty nice. Also, what happened with Brook Lopez in the offseason? What went into the pursuit? And how did it change the Rockets' plans? And we might finish up by talking Damian Lillard because, let's face it, everyone is doing it. And I want to find out how it is impacting the Bucks. But not only that, the Houston Rockets entering this season. Let's get into it. You are locked on Bucks and locked on Rockets. My name's Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on Locked On Bucks Monday to Friday, and also find my work over at ESPN. And if you want to find out anything about the Rockets, you should be listening to Locked On Rockets with Jackson Gatlin. He's also on Locked On NBA. He's doing various Houston Rockets stuff. He really, on my Twitter feed, is the man that keeps me up to date with everything going on in Rockets land. So make sure, if you haven't yet, you follow Jackson and keep up to date with everything going on with the Rockets. Today's podcast is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's Jase medical.com. And on behalf of Locked On Bucks and Locked On Rockets, we thank everyone for making this your first watch or first listen of every day. We're starting to get pretty excited because we've got through the offseason, the dark days of July and August. We had a World Cup to keep us slightly entertained.
Whoa, okay. Really the dark days of July. How dare you? Okay, that was my championship watching Summer League for the Rockets. Okay, man, those are not dark days for my team that I cover. Okay.
I forgot about that. Summer League, not quite as exciting in Bucks land, I would say that. There was some disappointing performances, to say the least. But the thing that we do appreciate is that everyone right through the summer has stuck with our shows. But if you haven't done so yet, subscribe, drop a like, a comment, rate, review, and do all those things because it's free to do and it helps continue to grow both of our shows as we now build in to the regular season. Jackson, I was on Locked On NBA with you a couple of days ago. We discussed the prospect of doing this podcast. And when you really sit back and think about what the Bucks and the Rockets have gone through in the offseason, that makes a little bit of sense. There is plenty of crossover topics to discuss. But I'm going to take the first serve here and ask about a young player that Bucks fans are pretty excited about the possibility of what he could bring to Milwaukee, mostly because the discussion on our show for a lot of the summer has been, who is the backup point guard? Who's going to play those guard minutes? It has been a position of need for the Bucks. TyTy Washington, talk us through the offseason and how he found his way out of Houston and then now to Milwaukee on a 2-way contract just 12 months after he was taken in the first round.
Well, I'll start with the first part of it there, Kane. The reason he found his way out of Houston was unfortunately due to maybe some mismanagement of assets, if you will. The Houston Rockets, and this kind of plays into what will be part of our conversation a little bit later on in the show, is their pursuit of Brook Lopez and trying to clear some cap space in order to pursue kind of their big 3 targets this offseason, which were Fred VanVleet, Dillon Brooks, and Brook Lopez, ultimately nabbing 2 out of those 3 with Brook Lopez choosing to stay in Milwaukee. And so TyTy Washington was kind of one of the unfortunate side effects of that pursuit, just needing to clear some cap space, offload some of the pieces that they didn't really think had a place, had a future in Houston. And it's unfortunate because TyTy Washington was actually, here in Houston, we thought TyTy had a really bright future. And it's just unfortunate because he never really got a chance to shine, to showcase himself here in Houston, because the Rockets have been doing this whole Kevin Porter Jr. experiment for the last 2.5 years. And, if you have interest in figuring out what's going on with the Kevin Porter Jr. news, the allegations that he's dealing with right now, I've done a couple episodes of that over at Locked on Rockets. I won't get super into that right here, but then they also were prioritizing undrafted talent Daishen Nix over TyTy Washington for the majority of this past season for their point guard play, much to the chagrin of Rockets fans everywhere, because this is a Kentucky level guard that showcased a lot of promise in college, and in the very brief minutes that he got at the NBA level, he looked good. He looked like he had a great feel for the game, really understood how to get other guys involved, just never really got the developmental runway to showcase his gifts and abilities. And so of the players that the Rockets lost, I'm actually really sad to see TyTy Washington go, but there wasn't really a way to envision a role for him here in Houston now that they brought in Fred VanVleet. Jalen Green's still going to have the ball in his hands quite a bit. They drafted Amen Thompson with the 4th overall pick. there was just no room for him anywhere in the rotation. But for a team like the Bucks, who could utilize a backup point guard and might have found a diamond in the rough here with TyTy Washington on a two-way deal that they could, down the line convert to a standard NBA contract, I think it's an absolute steal for Milwaukee. And I think Bucks fans are going to absolutely love what he brings to the table.
It's interesting so late in the offseason that sometimes these situational circumstance can provide you with what you described. If you're a Bucks fan, you're hoping there's a diamond in the rough, but it's absolutely a free swing and it's worth the shot here for a guy with the pedigree, as you already mentioned. So he went from Houston, then he's in Oklahoma City, and it was a similar situation. They are loaded with guards. They had far too many players on the roster. That's how he ends up in Milwaukee. So the Houston situation is interesting. They've got some veterans now, but last year, such a young team, lots of young guards in that mix. So what did you see from him that might lead you to believe that he could be able to thrive or at least get minutes on a Bucks team that, let's face it, is absolutely loaded with veterans? It's a completely different situation.
There's two things about TyTy that really stand out. One, I think he's a guy that is comfortable playing both on and off the ball. So there's a world where, if he's sharing the court, obviously, kind of point Giannis will have the ball in his hands, kind of creating offense, throughout the course of a game. TyTy's not a guy who feels uncomfortable playing off of the basketball. He's not a phenomenal shooter yet, but you go back to his collegiate numbers, and I think there's reason to believe that he can get to a place where he's a pretty consistent three-point shooter at the NBA level. Understands how to move without the basketball when he doesn't have the ball in his hands. So kind of, he's not got the size to really be a combo 1-2 guard. He basically is a point guard as far as just his body style, but he can play off the ball if necessary. And then he takes great care of the basketball when he does have the ball in his hands. Kind of plays beyond his years a little bit, really understands how to take care of the basketball, how to identify which guys to get the ball to. Okay, my big man has a mismatch. I'm going to clear things out, get him the ball down low, or we're going to back things out a little bit, slow things down, make sure we get a good high quality possession, right? Not a lot of the kind of rookie mistakes you would expect out of a guy as young as him. So I really think he's still a little raw, right? Didn't get a ton of developmental runtime last season, but in the brief spurts that we did get to see here in Houston, and maybe it's just kind of like contrasted. You have to contrast it with the fact that the Rockets didn't really have a quality point guard last year at all. They were still experimenting with Kevin Porter Jr. Dacian Nix was definitely not the answer. So maybe it was just like a breath of fresh air to see a player who actually understood the roles of a point guard. And that's why I'm as kind of gassed up on TyTy as I am right now. But I really do think he has a future as at the bare minimum, a solid backup at the NBA level. Could, somewhere down the line be like kind of a fringe starter where maybe if your talent is allocated at some of the other positions, right? You've got your big money at like the, 2 through 5 spots, and you just need like a quality NBA starter. Maybe that's TyTy Washington somewhere further down the line.
Yeah, last year the Bucks started with Javon Carter and also George Hill in the mix. Both of those guys aren't there, and there's potentially minutes there. I think this is absolutely simplifying things as well, but listening to what you've said there, Jackson, it sounds like Houston Rockets fans generally really like TyTy Washington as well, and I think that's fun. If there's a young player, a good character, easy to support, I think that's something Bucks fans should look out for. But I do think that it matters when a fan base collectively is disappointed to see a young player leave. I think that generally says a lot as well.
No, you're absolutely right. And, it's just an unfortunate kind of set of circumstances. Whenever a team's going through a rebuild, eventually you kind of hit the roster crunch. You kind of hit a wall where, okay, well, some of these young guys are going to have to bite the bullet, and there's just not going to be space for them as you kind of navigate the rebuild and get back to a level where, hey, you want to start being competitive again. You don't have all these minutes to allocate because now there's actual stakes this next season for the Rockets, right? They want to be competitive. They want to try and make it back to at least sniffing the play-in tournament, playing meaningful basketball games in January, February, March, hopefully, because let's face it, meaningful basketball games haven't been a thing in Houston for a couple seasons. So again, I think TyTy has still a lot of room to grow, definitely some work to be done on the defensive side of the basketball, but I am really optimistic for what he can actually achieve with the Bucks.
TyTy Washington, Marjon Beauchamp. There's a few young players Bucks fans are starting to get excited about. But you spoke about the transition for the Rockets from a team that has been collecting these young players, and now it looks like there's a bit more veteran stability. And I want to ask you about the pursuit of Brook Lopez coming next, because this was a situation that had Bucks fans feeling very nervous for a period of time. Let's get to Brook Lopez and the Rockets coming up after we speak about Jace Medical, the sponsor of today's podcast. and everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jace Medical offers the Jace case. The Jace case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you peace of mind so that you are not just hoping you have the access to medication in an emergency situation. Jace Medical makes sure you have that medication in hand, and it's very simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. So don't get caught underprepared. Get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics today from Jace Medical by using the code LOCKEDON at checkout at jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Make sure you keep it locked on Bucks and locked on Rockets this week over at Locked On Rockets. They're going through the positional situation in Houston for the rotation this week, so make sure you check out those podcasts there. And on Locked On Bucks, we have to get to the conversation around Drew Holiday. He says he wants to finish his career as a Milwaukee Buck, but then what does that mean for the Bucks? Also being reported in the Damian Lillard situation. So there's plenty going on for the Bucks and the Rockets, so make sure you check out those shows throughout this week. One guy that's not going anywhere, certainly for the very near future in Milwaukee, is Brook Lopez. From your perspective, how did you view the transition for the Rockets saying, okay, we need to bring some adults in the room to use that terminology and bring in Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, potentially a Brook Lopez, and specifically with Brook, how did you view that pursuit?
I thought it made a lot of sense, right? Brook Lopez is almost a defense unto himself, right? He is a guy that can completely change the complexion of a basketball team, and it makes a lot of sense. The Rockets brought in a very defensive-minded head coach in Ime Udoka, and they wanted to kind of rebuild the culture from the ground up. And how do you do that? Well, you bring more adults into the room, as you said, right? You bring in those veteran pieces, and Brook Lopez, I know for a fact, was very high on their priority list. At basically all 3 of these names, right? There was no secret that the Rockets were pursuing these 3 guys. My understanding was they kind of had their eyes set on these guys as early as, April, May. They were like, no, these are the 3 guys we really want to pursue in free agency. And they actually had kind of this agreement with Brook Lopez tentatively, as we all know, negotiations never start ahead of time, but it very much felt like both sides had come to terms on a deal that they felt very good about. And that's why the Rockets actually went out of their way to make all those subsequent moves where they dealt and, got rid of KJ Martin and TyTy Washington, Usman Garuba, Josh Christopher, all these young pieces that they were wheeling and dealing at the start of free agency, because they had these 3 deals all lined up with Fred VanVleet, with Brook Lopez, and with Dylan Brooks. But what ultimately happened is Brook Lopez, being the savvy vet that he is, and shout out to his agent for doing the dirty work, I guess, leveraged the Houston Rockets offer, took it back to Milwaukee, and basically said, hey, Houston's offering us this. Brook is going to leave unless you up the offer. And so Milwaukee had to think long and hard about it, because at the end of the day, Milwaukee could have offered however much money they wanted, right? It was about how much pain tolerance does Milwaukee have, right? Are they willing to lose Brook Lopez for nothing, or do they want to, pay a steep luxury tax and have to keep him and pay through the nose to do it? And ultimately, the Rockets even tried to go further. They tried to double back and give him even more money than what the Bucks offered. But Brook Lopez, being, very content, happy in Milwaukee, happy with his time as a Milwaukee Buck, said, no, I'm good with the money that I got. I know you guys are trying to offer me even more. I think the Rockets were willing to go up to, I think it was like 2 years, like 27 a year, 28 a year, like so somewhere around like the, close to 60, basically like 58 over 2 years or something. And even then he was just like, no, I got the money that I wanted, and I'm happy to stay in a winning situation in Milwaukee. And it's unfortunate because Brook Lopez would have been, a huge get for this young Rockets team, would have definitely helped them on the defensive side of the ball. The one kind of positive silver lining from this is Alperen Şengün has showcased a ton of talent through 2 years at the NBA level, almost in spite of the previous coaching regime, because the Rockets under Steven Silas never really leaned into the talents and gifts that Alperen Şengün brings to the table as a versatile passing big, a baby Jokic, if you will. And hopefully this next coaching era with Ime Udoka and the new assistant coaching staff, hopefully they're able to identify and lean into those talents and gifts a bit more. So it's kind of a thing where maybe they've fallen a little ass backwards into a possibility of like seeing what this young guy actually has, because if they had brought Brook Lopez in, then there's the question mark of, okay, how do you make these two guys work together, right? Brook Lopez likely would have been the starter, which would have been Alper and Şengün either coming off the bench, or maybe some weird dynamic where you try to play a double big lineup between those two guys and maybe slot Jabari Smith Jr. down at the 3, or he's coming off the bench. It just would have led to a lot more questions, rather than now you're going to the season, Şengün is your starting big, and hopefully they lean into his talent and you get to actually see what he's capable of now in a much more structured environment than kind of just the way the Rockets have been rolling the ball out there the last 2 years playing AAU basketball.
Well, I think it was fascinating. You talk about the money situation for Brook, and certainly on this show, Locked On Bucks, as we tried to project what it looked like for the offseason, you understood for Milwaukee that they had to bring back Middleton and Lopez, or they were going to be in serious trouble this year because they just had no flexibility. We probably thought Chris Middleton was going to get more money than he did and Brook Lopez less. But the market can dictate that. And having that one team, Houston, that was heavily involved in Brook Lopez clearly ramped up the price. It is interesting that Brook Lopez ends up around $25 million this year. Plus you get Robin Lopez. So maybe it's the combined Lopez around that $27, $28 million mark. They got that offer that the Rockets had. So maybe that's the part that swung it there for the Lopez boys. But the Rockets did pivot and sign a man close to my heart, Jock Landale. So how do you, because you talk about Şengün and Jock Landale's spoken about, he's going to camp typically, as he always will, to battle for that starting spot. How did Rockets fans handle Jock Landale, who, maybe some Bucks fans aren't fully across what he's done the last few years, but last year in particular, really, really solid backup in Phoenix and was playing major minutes through the postseason. Didn't work out the way that the Phoenix Suns wanted to, but he's absolutely proved himself as a very, very reliable NBA big man.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's an argument to be made that he had a more successful postseason than DeAndre Ayton, right? And I don't even think that's really an argument. I think it's just factual at this point. Look, I think the Rockets did the best that they could do given the circumstances, where my understanding is they kind of had to pivot very last minute from Brook Lopez during the negotiation process, because they thought they had a deal with him. And then during those first few hours of free agency, they were unable to make contact with him. And so I assume that's because Brook Lopez was trying to leverage the deal back with Milwaukee. So the Rockets had to pivot last minute and figure out, okay, well, what do we do with this money now that Brook Lopez is off the table? So they go out and they get, a veteran in Jeff Green. And then they also got Jock Landale, who I love, right? They got him on an incredibly team-friendly deal, 4 years, only the first year fully guaranteed, $8 million. The way the deal is structured, it's basically a team option every single year. So a lot of club control. But he is the type of big that I think you come in, he's going to, really make Şengün kind of fight for his spot. I think Şengün will still be the de facto starter, but it's a nice kind of change of pace to have a big like Jock Landale to throw out there as Şengün's backup situationally. That they've got kind of this like 3-headed dragon at their 5 spot now with Şengün, Landale, and then situationally Jeff Green as like a small ball 5, space the floor, 5 out, that kind of thing. I'm really excited for what Jock's going to bring to the table. I think that collectively the entire Rockets second unit has this kind of really gritty dog mentality about them, where we're going to see a lot of kind of like wrecking crew basketball is what I've liked to call it in the past. Last year, the Rockets had a group of guys that they lovingly called the Goon Squad on the broadcast, which was KJ Martin, Tari Eason, and Usman Garuba. And 2 of those guys are now gone, but you replace them with Amin Thompson, Jae'Sean Tate, who is hopefully healthy this year for the Rockets, and now Jock Landale. You throw those 3 guys in the mix with Tari Eason, and I think that second unit is really going to give teams headaches because of how hard every single one of those guys plays on both sides of the floor, especially defensively. So I think it's a great pickup for the Rockets. Makes a lot of sense. Team-friendly deal. I'm excited to see what he does in Houston, honestly.
Jae'Sean Tate, another man close to my heart, former Sydney King. But let's talk about a big name across the NBA, Damian Lillard. Let's get to that next. I know you've been covering it on Locked On NBA, but I am fascinated to know how you have viewed the last few weeks and what could potentially happen in the next week. So Damian Lillard coming up next. So the saga of the offseason, and I've been saying for all the talk about Giannis, to me, the big story of this offseason is clearly Damian Lillard. We're getting close to preseason basketball and still nothing has happened. And perhaps not surprisingly, over the last week, this has all started to ramp up as all these teams probably start to get a little bit antsy. there's other contenders in the mix that are trying to throw their name in the hat, including Milwaukee reportedly. Mark Spears all over that one, with the Bucks potentially making some calls. I don't think that it's a big surprise, but how have you viewed this from the Rockets' point of view? Because I do think, as I discussed, Houston, a team looking to make it certainly into the play-in tournament mix, but hopefully the postseason. And what Portland does absolutely matters, even if it does look like Damian Lillard is going to make his way to the Eastern Conference at some point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think kind of even just as we've been navigating this whole Dame saga, whether it's East, West, I think we can safely chalk up in the Western Conference, there are two teams that are decidedly not gunning for a playoff spot. And that's currently the San Antonio Spurs and the Portland Trailblazers. Regardless of whatever happens with Dame, they're not going to make the playoffs. I think we can be safe about that. But for the other 13 teams out West, all 13 of those teams would ideally like to be in the running for the playoffs. The Utah Jazz were, a few games removed from the play-in hunt last year. The Dallas Mavericks barely missing it, shutting their guys down at the end of the season. Even though Luka protested that and didn't want to go that route. I don't know. I think the Dame situation, it's just constantly felt like it's just going to wind up being Miami. Even though you've got these other teams that are rumored, maybe, slightly connected, teams kind of reaching out, kicking the tires on it. Milwaukee, the Celtics, the Toronto Raptors. Side note on the Raptors, if Masai Ujiri goes and collects yet another disgruntled star and the Raptors go on this like Cinderella title run yet again, then we might have to have a serious discussion about how, I don't know, it would be both an awesome experience, but also hilarious at the same time that they just keep going out and finding these unhappy stars, bringing them in and putting the right pieces around them. And I think Toronto could make a lot of sense. I don't know from your perspective, if Milwaukee even is heavily interested, if they're trying to make this happen, I don't know how their package would even remotely stack up to some of the other teams, right? What's the current status of the Bucks picks? Does it make sense? Is Drew Holiday about to actually not get his wish to retire a Buck? Because you'd have to imagine Drew Holiday from a financial perspective probably has to be included in this deal to make it work if Dame was to go to Milwaukee, right?
It seems like it's pretty low on the scale of probability in terms of the Bucks being able to pull this off. It would obviously have to be a 3-team trade just because the Bucks don't have the draft capital that some of these other teams have. And you can make the case they don't actually have, along with Drew Holiday, the young talent to throw in a potential trade as well. So it seems like it's pretty unlikely unless you had a third team that was really into the idea of having Drew Holiday on the roster. Now, I don't think that you can totally discount that. It feels like the deal would have to be a little more complicated. I'm just more fascinated from the Bucks' point of view this offseason because you cover a team where there has been some turmoil, some player turnover, some ups, certainly some downs over the last few years. But the Bucks haven't been there. This has been probably the most steady franchise in the whole entire league. There's never any drama. Everything just cruises along. Now they've got a new head coach. Drew Holiday saying he wants to be in Milwaukee forever, but at the same time, you understand that certainly if reports are accurate, that they call in and saying, hey, is anyone interested in Drew Holiday so we can bring in Damian Lillard? Giannis obviously has said the stuff that he said. So I think the dynamic in Milwaukee is certainly the big story point for me. I don't necessarily think that they'll get Damian Lillard, but I'm curious about how all this plays out. It's a veteran team. You don't have guys in this locker room that generally have caused any trouble across the course of their career. They're all very level-headed, mature guys. But I think that whether you're covering the Bucks like we are or from the outside, I think watching the Milwaukee Bucks this year is going to be fascinating.
No, absolutely. And this is going to be kind of a pivotal season for the Bucks, right? I mean, you have to really show to Giannis, hey, we are serious about getting this team back to, its championship contender status after a disappointing exit to last season. And I kind of posited this question to you on Locked On NBA, but I think it's so interesting, the idea of, if you're the Bucks, how much risk versus reward is there in maybe a bit earlier, right? Like as early as maybe this season, this deadline, possibly thinking about the idea of trying to tear down the current Bucks core to put a stronger piece or two that's a bit more along Giannis's timeline, as you've got kind of the older core of Brook Lopez, Drew Holiday, Middleton. How do you maybe retool around Giannis so that he still feels like he has a chance and wants to stay in Milwaukee long-term? So you look at all these pieces, right? There are contenders out there that would absolutely love to have a Drew Holiday or a Middleton or hell, a Brook Lopez, right? But are you able to potentially flip some of those pieces if you had to, right? Flip some of those pieces, get back either the young guys or the draft capital that you would need to then make a run at a guy like a Damian Lillard, right? And then at that point is a core duo of a Dame and a Giannis, and just those two guys plus whatever else you can put around them, if that's the route you wanted to go. Is that better than sticking with the tried and true core of Giannis and then Middleton, Drew, Brook Lopez, all of that? I think it's really fascinating. It's going to be crazy to see whether this situation kind of drags itself even further out, right? There's a lot of confidence from our guy Mike Richmond over at Locked On Blazers. He believes that we will see a Damian Lillard trade by the end of this week. Before media day, before training camp officially hits. He had a lot of confidence in that answer, but you see the reporting, you see the speculation around the league. There's other teams trying to, get involved here. And it really kind of feels like if Miami doesn't just up the ante and put their best offer in, which they haven't to this point, then another team might swoop in and take Damian Lillard out from under him.
I love it. It's absolutely beautiful, everything that's going on. And hopefully it works out for Damian Lillard in particular, because let's face it, certainly as far as I'm concerned, one of the more likable superstars in the league over the last couple of decades for sure. And he's put in a hell of a lot of time there in Portland. And I think similar to the conversation we had about Giannis, whatever happens with Giannis down the line, I think he's always going to be loved in Milwaukee. And I would suspect it's going to be the same for Dame in Portland, even though, the Bucks have obviously been able to win that title. But I just don't foresee the Bucks having any major drama through this regular season. I think if something big like that is going to happen, assuming they don't get involved in any Damian Lillard stuff in the next few days, I think next off season, post the playoffs, is when you're going to have a look and see what the Bucks are going to do next, with Drew Holiday obviously looking for a contract extension as well. But it's a fascinating time for the Bucks and the Rockets as far as I'm concerned. I think the Rockets are going to be a team to watch this year, because I think the mix of the young players and now the veterans they've brought in make them very fascinating. New head coach for both of these teams as well. So make sure you keep up to date with everything going on with the Bucks and Rockets, with Locked On Bucks and Locked On Rockets. And listen to this great man, Jackson Gatlin, on Locked On NBA as well. This has been a lot of podcasting for me and you compared to usual this week, but it's been an absolute pleasure, my friend.
Absolutely, man. Always happy to be able to talk basketball with you.
All right. Make sure you subscribe, comment, rate, review, do all those things. Support Locked On Bucks, Locked On Rockets, and Locked On NBA. And as I mentioned, we've got big shows coming up for the rest of this week. So for Jackson and myself, we will catch you all tomorrow.